What's going on, everybody? All three people who are going to watch this. So I wanted to do a quick video. I like to do a couple videos in a series, just like accrued wisdom that I think over time other people have, managed to post and I've seen and tried to process. I'd like to share that. If, again, no one watches it, that's fine. Also, I'm just super exhausted after quite a long overnight shift, so sorry if it's rambly. And also chew tobacco, so there's gonna be some spitting involved, but hopefully you hang in there, because I think there's some things that be important for everyone to know or to think about. So one of those things is it's a question that I've had for a couple years. We have access to information from almost 2,000 years of human history. Well, more than that. I mean, up to 6,000 years, really, if you count the Sumerians. But how do we have access to all the information that the world's ever known, and we're in a period of time where scientific advancement can allow us to define the world and the universe around us and each other in the most accurate and pure terms possible, and yet we're getting dumber as a society? It doesn't make any sense. And the answer, really, truly the answer is we're not created or evolved enough to be able to handle that, to be able to handle the society around us. And that gets into my point today, which is the reason why society is, at large, is fundamentally stupid, is that there's too much information for our brains to handle. And nothing I say is new. Like I said, this is kind of like an amalgamation of my own thoughts and stuff I've seen elsewhere. But if you think about it, like, we're regressing back into our brains. We're designed or created or evolved to be tribal in nature. So we'll seek to be part of a tribe. Well, a tribe brings with it a certain belief system, which brings with it a righteousness. Whether you're atheist, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, doesn't matter. If you're part of a tribe, be it your religion, your political ideology, your race, whatever it is, then it brings with it security and comfort. And from an evolutionary standpoint, that makes sense. If the tribe next to you is going to come and raid your village and steal your women and, rape your daughters and take all your stuff and kill you, other is bad. And so, it makes sense to be of a tribal mindset. And unfortunately, though, with a tribal mindset also comes its cousin, which is like an ideology or a certain belief system that we're predisposed to wanting. Like Carl Jung talked about that. It's like it's an archetype. We will create a god. So America's abandoning God, but yet, like Marvel movies are the biggest thing in the world. Because we're always going to reach out or hope for or generate, higher powers for us to be able to look up to, hope to, pray to, or whatever. But so what happens is we're designed for only a certain amount of information input and for a certain amount of people in our lives. We're not supposed to be empathizing with people. It's good to do, but you can't think about the Uyghurs over in China getting massacred, or 120,000 people dying in a tsunami in Malaysia. How much of this can you take in and still empathize outwards? And the answer is like not much. There's this thing called Dunbar's number. Dunbar's number is a scientific principle that the maximum amount of active relationships you can have in your head at one time is 150. Now, obviously that can change. There's outliers. It's a spectrum, but on average 150 people are the maximum that one human being, maximum amount of people that they can manage in their lives. We have 350 million people in America and 7 many billion people on the planet, at a time when science, technology, psychology, everything is off the spectrum or off the scale in terms of advancements and size. So we're overwhelmed by the number of inputs we have in terms of people, and so that makes us revert back to the more tribal way of looking at things. Naturally, it's a natural reaction. And so you take certain things that are happening now in science. You take quantum computing, for instance. Quantum computing is based on this cool thing called a qubit. I'm not going to get into what that means, but once that's really quantum computers exist now, but once it's really hammered down, you're going to have exponential increase in computing power, and you're talking about software programs that can write themselves. And eventually you'll have general artificial intelligence, which is considered sentience. And at that point, AI because of its convenience. We're already using it. Machine learning algorithms like in your keyboard for predictive text, and self-driving cars use it, things like that. As it becomes more advanced, especially through quantum computing, you're going to find that it'll become an existential threat to mankind real soon. Like that's happening right now. And so, but another thing too is you think about like genetic engineering through you should research this. CRISPR-9 is a genetic engineering tool. It's basically a desktop software for engineering the human genome. You can do it at birth. You can engineer changes later in life. There's a lot of ethics that go into it, and a lot of reasons why like they've released mosquitoes, for instance, that mate and cause society collapse, cause a species to collapse in a certain ecosystem, so that way malaria doesn't spread. The problem is you don't know what the knock-on effects are, and so if you start genetically modifying human beings, we have no way to predict what that will be, which is why they're going slow, but that exists now. And countries around the world are slowly creeping towards competition in genetic enhancement. So at some point, say China, just because they're easy to pick on, or Russia, start genetically engineering young children for increased intelligence, increased health, increased strength, increased size, lifespan, things like that. Either like say America would have to follow suit or fall behind. That's happening right now. Those are just two examples of things that my point there is the average person, including myself, typically doesn't have time to think about that. If you're struggling to pay your bills, this is stupid inflation. You're struggling to pay your bills, you have family drama, you have work, you have 1,000 other constant pressures on your mind and inputs from media and things like that. There's just no way to know it all. There's no way to process what it means to you. And so getting towards the overwhelming nature of information now, you take science. Science is becoming so advanced in its different disciplines. It's freaking impossible for one person to really understand, one discipline, much less, 40 disciplines of science, and the way it could impact our future in terms of technology, psychology, the way we understand things. There's too much to know. Same thing with economics now. We have a globalized economy. Back in the days of Locke, it's people back then had economic theories. No one could really define or describe the way that the general national or global economy worked. Well, now we have this global economy that's tied in so tightly that it's impossible for one person, to even understand it, to disseminate that information. Then for the average Joe, to be able to have that percolate in a functional way. So there's too many inputs. And so, like I said, we're regressing back. And so if you look at modern society now, this is May 2022, you see this division of people, but not just division of people. You see a willing and an arrogant, application of bias. So otherwise intelligent people will latch on to really stupid concepts, and they just run with them. And they run with them because that's what you do. Unfortunately, because your brain is overwhelmed, it's easy to have someone that you trust to be like, here's what I believe, here's what you should believe. And if they're persuasive, then you're going to be more apt to adopt those things, which means the government, the media, corporations and advertising, things like that, social media, you're going to be a lot more controllable because you don't have time to vet, everything going on like that. So it's real frustrating for me because I look at the country, I look at the economy, and I don't have all the answers. But I sure as heck know that there's a lot of really stupid, things that are being applied. And otherwise intelligent people are screaming at each other over the most ignorant shit in the world. And it doesn't make any sense because until you think, why are people acting this way? And if you break it down, we've lost what you'd call a unifying religion, even if you're Catholic, Protestant, whatever. the fact that you had an accountable religion in general meant that there was like a unified moral code. Say, you call it evil, call it good, call it what you will, but there was a generally aligned, path that people would follow in terms of morality and things like that. And now it's just like, we don't have a unifying code. And so a lot of people argue, okay, well, you can have an agnostic unifying code. You could have a secular one. You could have human rights, things based on the Enlightenment. People can't agree on that either. At this point, there's so much, like when it comes to racism, for instance, there's more segregation now. It's like the most important aspect of you is not that you're a Homo sapien and you're born with inalienable rights. It's the fact that you're a member of a protected class and you're oppressed from birth, and that's a currency. Does that make sense? So we've gone past enlightenment, we've gone past rationalism. Now we're going back to tribalism, the most important element to a lot of people, and the way that we'll say radical progressives define folks, and this is not a knock on anybody, is based on your protected class, not who you are as a person, or trying to find rational or reasonable ways to work together for society or civilization. That's bad. And so this is like one big soup and melting pot as to, I think a way to help you define why things are going the way they're going. And one thing you're not going to get from me a whole lot are solutions. Because if you try to diagnose who benefits from the way that society is going, from this fractional tribalism and lack of critical thinking, well, it's anyone that wants to sell you something, or anybody that wants power, or to get a point across. Like, those people benefit. They benefit greatly. The media benefits from your clicks, clickbait, human psychology, if it bleeds, it leads. But now we've gotten to a dangerous point in our society where, talk about power and control, now that media, mainstream, social media, search engines, repositories of knowledge and institutions of science and learning have all gathered around a narrative that doesn't make sense. So, and in doing so, they're creating mechanisms similar to what you call the medieval Catholic Church's mechanisms for power. Science is a new religion. It takes the same hallmarks. If you look at this bullcrap over COVID-19, whatever you believe about it, you had actual valid scientific information, doctors and healthcare professionals and scientists that were urging caution, or let's just have a conversation about the efficacy or safety of, say, the vaccine. They were ostracized. They were criticized. Many of them lost their jobs, their positions, any credibility, a way to make a living for their families. That's not good. You'd have your search engine is censoring results. Social media censors posts. The government is taking science and saying you have to believe in science. So now it's a faith. Science is something you're supposed to question until it's validated. And even when it's validated, you look for new research that branches off from that. Science is meant to be questioned. That's how it works. And but now it's taken on the form of a religion. It's able to be used by the state in such a way as a means of control. Science itself as a concept, like the scientific theory, scientific principles, they're beautiful. That's amazing. I'm talking to you now, on a device that relies on the fundamentals of science. But you can co-opt that term. Anyone can say, oh yeah, believe the science. I came up with something, I'm a scientist, or this has scientific validity because, I run the NIH, so I can, or whatever. And I can fund your research, or I can pull your research and ruin you as an academic unless you do this, that, and the other. And then you go on TV and say, trust the science. So now it's like an exclusive truth, like the church had back then. We have inquisitions in terms of, public outcry over anything that goes against the narrative. And this isn't just about COVID, it's about anything. And so what that does is it sets a precedent for censorship and psychological hacking based on what we talked about earlier. So that's scary. That's the future we live in. That's our present, actually. So in terms of the future, there's nothing you can do, really. You can support the Electronic Frontiers Foundation. They try to advocate for privacy online and things like that. You can do a number of things, but in aggregate, it's like that scene from Star Wars where it's like, so this is how liberty dies, with thunderous applause. People prefer safety over freedom. They would willingly and gladly trade that, or make that trade-off, and aggressively go after anyone that got in the way of that. Using your conscience, you're like, oh, well, you don't want kids to be safe at schools. You don't want, you don't want people to be vaccinated and to be healthy. And you're like, well, hey, the vaccine doesn't work and it's based on unproven science, and I can show that with math. But you're still ostracized. So science is the new religion, and it's co-opted by those in power. The term anyway, not the actual fundamentals. So just be aware of that. So hopefully that's, spread a little bit of light on what I see is going on. And in terms of how it's going to go, it's not a good picture, to be honest with you. I'd like to quickly address the what happened in Texas, the school shooting that took 21 lives, 19 children, 2 adults. I don't even have the words for it. Like, I read about that, and it, I'm a father, it greatly affected me. And then I knew it was coming. I put on Facebook, I was like, let's cool it on the bullshit. Let's just focus on praying for the families and doing whatever small part we can. Thoughts and prayers, donations, like just words of encouragement and solidarity with, the families and the fellow children and everybody, the law enforcement officers and first responders. Nope. President gets on TV immediately, starts blaming Republicans for all the gun violence in the country. And so I like to spare a thought for the families. Before I say, when you look at firearms in the country, they haven't changed in 50 years. You take an M16A1, you set it down next to my SBR AR-15, same rifle, different barrel length and stuff like that. But the rifle hasn't changed. The ammunition hasn't really changed. So if the guns haven't changed, it's not the gun's fault then. So if you want to look at it like, well, so what is at fault here? Well, clearly it's the human psychology. And so you look at the influence of like social media separating us, in terms of our connections are now online. They're not empathetic. You're not really used to reading other people's facial expressions as much. You don't make human connections as deep because everyone's on their phones all the time. You have violent video games, violent media, this, that, and the other, which, you could say does or does not play a part in things, but it's a general desensitizing that's taking place. And what it is, people have lost empathy. And they're unfortunately programmed to do so from birth. I'm not saying on purpose, but just through the act of trying to sell kids on whatever it is somebody wants to sell them, be it a video game, social media platform, whatever, YouTube video, it has the effect of, I think, of desensitizing us to each other. So when you talk about, common sense gun laws and blah, 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 people used to bring guns to my school all the time. You could have them in the gun rack on your vehicle in the parking lot. I think my senior year, I think they did away with that. But they wouldn't call the cops. They'd just understand, hey, we're a rural environment. No one ever threatened anybody with a gun, or anything like that. And there were issues at that school, tensions between different groups. Yet no one even thought to take it there. And if you did, it wasn't a big thing, you didn't follow through. You had some kind of mental fortitude or connection to other human beings that stopped that from happening. But so that's within my lifetime. So the humans have changed. But so if you really want to stop kids from being hurt at school or workplaces, from being shot up, you need to look at what's really important and what's really changed, and that's the human. And we're not having that conversation. So if this has any effect, hopefully that you within your peer group at least can advocate for having the conversation on something that's actually valid. So keep your head up, keep the faith, because that's all we can do. In terms of the direction of the country, whether it's a micro issue, like a single lane issue like gun control, or it's a macro issue in terms of society and things like that. So anyway, I want to leave you with a quote. I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but it says, "Never consider it a sign of good health to be well adjusted to a sick society." So anyway, cheers, God bless.